one really important concept that separates intermediate and advanced producers is simplicity. When a track or a melody even becomes too complex, it sort of loses its focus. So today we're going to dive into 3 guidelines for effective simplicity in your tracks. So number 1 is you should simplify your bass lines. And this is because a simple bass line will make the production of the rest of your track way easier. This is especially important for rhythmic focused genres like house music, like tech house, like techno, trance, the list goes on. But there's a lot of different adverse effects that you'll run into when you complexify your bass lines too much. The first one being a complex bass line will eat up a whole bunch of space in your mix, and it's actually harder to fit in other elements after you've complexified your bass line. Let me demonstrate this for you. I've got this complex bass line here and this drums. Let's just show you this first. And then I'm going to go over to this other example over here, which is a really simplified bass line. It sort of just locks into the groove and it actually allows all the other elements to shine and do their thing. So let's just listen to the drums and the bass first. It really just gels with the drums nicely and just locks into that groove, right? So let's just play it with the other elements here as well. This is quite a minimalistic track, but these other elements are really important for this. So let's have a listen. So you can see those other elements have heaps of space to sort of do their thing, right? Whereas in this example over here, let's go back one more time and play the same little snippet. So first of all, I can't even really hear this at all. This is sort of clashing with some spots in here. And this is simply just because the amount of notes that we have just clouds all of the other stuff that's going on. Over here, because we have less notes, we have much more gaps for everything else to be weaved in. Another thing you should be wary of is a complex melody is usually harder to remember. If there's more notes, there's more stuff going on. There's actually more stuff for our brain to process, more things for our brain to remember as well. So if we have a simplistic hook, it's usually going to be way catchier because there's just less for us to remember, right? So general rule of thumb, a more simplistic bass line is just going to allow it to be way more catchy, allow way more space in your mix, and just make the production of the rest of your track way easier. And just quickly before I move on, if you're looking at getting into house music, then I would highly recommend checking out our house starter kit. This is just a whole bunch of high quality samples and presets curated specifically for house music to get you off your feet in the beginning. So number 2 is that even complex melodies are simplistic at their core. They need to be simplistic because, like we just talked about, it's really easy to go into the territory of moving around too much and sort of losing that focus. But if they are simplistic at their core, then they still keep that focus. So we can still make complex melodies. We just sort of have to be smart about how we're doing it. Let's have a listen to this example here. So this melody seems pretty complex, but underneath the surface, if we strip back all of the extra notes, we actually get this. So let's have a listen to this. And this is sort of like the rhythmic core, that simplistic foundation that I'm talking about. So because I was internalizing this simplistic foundation as I was making this melody, that's what actually makes this bassline melody work without it losing focus. So let's have a go in here. I'm going to try and remember what I did. I think I sort of added an extra note in here, right? And then maybe I added an extra one here, I think as well. Right, and so we're sort of just adding extra little grace notes around the place just to spice up this a little bit. And then I did this little trill in here as well. So maybe something like this. And then the last thing I did was sort of just push the notes in the chord progression a little bit. So these last notes of each bar, I just brought down to the next note a little bit early. So let's have a listen to this now. So you can see how all of these little things are complexifying the melody, but staying true to its simplistic foundation. So it still is catchy, it's still groovy, but also has that sort of funky, complex feel. So we can get complex melodies to work. We just need to keep in mind that simple foundation, and we also need to give it enough space in the mix. So remember how we just talked about how complex melodies take up more space in your mix? This is still going to be true. So we just need to make sure we're giving it enough space in the mix. We're prioritizing that complex thing and just letting it shine. So the last thing I wanted to talk about today is the rule of three. The rule of three is that we can only really comprehend three core main ideas in our track at once. Once we start to have more than three core ideas, then you'll find that they'll start to fight for attention and fight for space. That doesn't mean that we can't have more than three elements in our track. It just means that there should be three core elements, and then all the other elements are more or less just supporting those core elements. So let's have a look at this track here. It's pretty much finished. It just needs a little bit of a mix down. I made this track in the 1 hour music producer video, so I'll link that at the top. But let's have a listen to this little section here. So it sounds like there's a lot going on, right? But what essentially is happening is the drums, they feel like one element. Our brain is perceiving them as one thing, like one drum kit, the rhythm section, right? Same with the basses. There's a whole bunch of different tones in here, but our brain is more or less perceiving it as one thing. So I'll play that with the drums. And then the last core element, of course, is the pads. So we've got this pad here. And then everything else in the track is merely just supporting those three elements. So we have a string layer. We have this sort of effects tone here, right? I have sort of other effects that come and go, but it's really just those three core elements that you're primarily listening to. So how can we actually use the rule of three in our tracks to help us produce? This is a bit more of a simplistic example because we only have the core elements in this track. There's no sort of supporting effects or anything. And so I'm just going to collapse this one, and we just have this drums, we have this bass, and then we have this M1 stab here. So let's have a listen to this. Really simple, just three main ingredients that are sort of filling the track nicely. I've got one more serum track here though, and I want to introduce this track. So how am I going to do that adhering to the rule of three? If I was just to put it straight in, then you'll find that this track and this track actually sort of clash a little bit. So let's just put them next to each other. These two tracks clash a little bit. So it's not the worst thing in the world, but they're definitely fighting for a little bit of attention here. And this is what I'm talking about in terms of the rule of three. Once we introduce that fourth core element, we're trying to listen to everything at once, but there's just a little bit too much going on. So instead of simply just smacking it straight into our track, what we can do is we can try and prioritize one of them, or we can sort of replace them. So let's have a listen. If I was to turn this track down over here, this serum track, then we're going to be prioritizing this track, and this one is going to become a supporting background element. So let's have a listen to this. We can also do stuff like this, where I've got a utility and I'm just going to automate the gain of it. So I can bring down the volume over here so that this track is playing and being prioritized here. And then when it's ringing out and there's no notes playing, then I can sort of bring up this track over here, and they can sort of swap with each other. And so that way we can have the best of both worlds without having them clash each other. That's one technique. What we could also do is just simply replace them in the arrangement. So I'm going to slowly bring in this track over here, and then I'm going to bring out this track and replace them. So let's have a listen to this. Maybe I could take out the kick drum. So you can see how that one starts to take over, being the priority of the track, and the other one comes out, and it just makes much more sense to us. So if you want to step up your production game, I would encourage you to challenge yourself. See if you can make a really simple track that maintains interest the whole way through. Try to stay as simple as you can with your melodies, adhere to the rule of 3. Even trying to minimize the amount of processing that you use is going to challenge yourself to really think about your sound design and your sample selection as well. It's a really healthy thing to do, because if you can nail a simple track, then making complex tracks, complex melodies is way easier. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask me in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, thanks for hanging out, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.